Carl and his wife Helen and their daughter Chloe have been members of Brooklyn Ethical for some 20 years. Carl has been a regular facilitator of our colloquies and a guest speaker at our platforms, including leading a COVID memorial program. Today, he's delivering his transition speech to us, the one that he gave before his recent retirement, where after spending 27 years representing faculty members and other academic workers at all levels, including among them graduate student employees, adjunct faculty, and contingent and tenure track full-time faculty at major colleges and universities in the New York, New Jersey area as their counsel. And it doesn't say this here, I'm going to go a little bit off script. Carl's also been an advocate for union democracy movements and a person who's helped improve the overall power and success of the labor movement. Among the faculty unions that he helped represent as a lawyer was NYU, the New School, Barnard, NJIT, and Union County College. And a lot of the folks from those unions were pivotal in Mamdani getting elected. So it's just an incredibly important role that he's played in New York City life for the last generation, essentially. And also, Carl is even more famous for being the dance scholar in Brooklyn contra dancing. Carl is a teacher of traditional dance as well as storytelling. So it's just absolutely amazing to have you come and give our platform. All right, Carl Levine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill.
So this works better if it's about 8 inches lower than your mouth. So you don't have to put it all the way down here.
I'm a little bit injured, so I'm going to have the privilege of sitting down. But thank you so much, Bill, for the kind words, and it's an honor to have you preside, and it's always an honor and a privilege to share the space with Dupre and Barry with their wonderful music. And welcome to all of you, many of you I know, longtime BSEC members, new BSEC members, as well as friends who have come to join me today, and I appreciate that. In 2018, after votes held by the 2 largest teachers' unions in West Virginia, teachers and support staff went on strike demanding higher wages and lower health insurance premiums. The strike shut down schools statewide. It did so notwithstanding the fact that strikes by public workers in West Virginia are illegal. Indeed, even collective bargaining in West Virginia is illegal. Nonetheless, as a result of statewide solidarity by the striking workers and the broad support they received from citizens throughout the state, the teachers prevailed, achieving wage increases more than double what the state government had originally proposed and approved. Perhaps most remarkable is the fact that this occurred during Trump's first term in a state that had voted overwhelmingly for Trump in 2016, just 15 months earlier. The strike united teachers and support staff who supported both political parties and was widely supported by members of the community of all political affiliations. And the strike inspired similar statewide strikes in 2018 and 2019. In other red states, in Oklahoma, where Trump had won the 2016 election by a margin of 27%, and in Arizona, where he had won by 3%, as well as smaller strikes in Kentucky and North Carolina. In fact, the phrase "red for Ed" was coined to describe these strikes. Yet despite these broad demonstrations of unity by workers in 2018 and 2019, and subsequently in other ways that I'll review in a moment, the working class remains politically divided when it comes to party affiliation and their votes in recent national elections. This fact and what it reflects, including the defection of large numbers of working people from the Democratic Party, more than any other single factor, in my opinion, allowed for the rise of the fascist and proto-fascist right in this country. A rise which, along with a cadre of stormtroopers at its core, threatens everything most of us value and hold dear. Despite the glimmer of hope brought by the recent off-year elections, The left cannot rely on victories in lower turnout off-year elections alone to save us. Not only are there structural issues baked into existing law that work against fair elections, we can also reasonably conclude, based on actual statements made and actions taken by the leadership of the Republican Party, that efforts will be made to subvert legitimate electoral outcomes if such outcomes threaten its hold on power. It may well be that only a massive, unified opposition movement that, if necessary, can overwhelm efforts to subvert fair elections will be enough. The possibility of building such a movement may seem like a chimera to some, but as those of you who know me know, I believe deeply in the centrality of hope. Despair is not an option. If we are to have any chance of pushing back the right-wing onslaught and building the kind of loving, cooperative, equitable, and joyful world we want, we must believe in the possibility of building such a world and be willing to work towards it. And with every fiber of my being, I believe that that is possible. Not inevitable, but possible. In my presentation today, I will share some of my thoughts about how we ended up in this perilous situation we are in now, and one possible strategy for uniting progressive forces to defeat the right. But I want to begin by briefly telling you about the genesis of this presentation, though Bill has touched on this to some extent. As Bill said, I've spent my entire adult life fighting for and with working people. I've done so because of my conviction that working people as a group have an inherent interest in working for a world that is more economically and socially just, and have the economic power to lead such a fight. A major part of that lifetime, of my lifetime, has been the 27 years I spent as a labor and employment lawyer representing working people in their unions, a role from which I retired just 4 months ago. Earlier this year, as I contemplated my upcoming retirement and considered the many things I wanted to do with my available time, it was clear to me that I wanted to, indeed needed to, remain politically active. In addition to being available to give advice to my former union clients and mentoring young law students and activists when such opportunities arise, I had several ideas for articles that I wanted to write. I view this presentation today as a beta run of the article at the top of that list. In that spirit, I welcome any and all feedback on this presentation, either in the available time after I'm done or thereafter. Finally, given my legal training, I want to be clear. In this presentation, I am speaking only for myself. My views do not necessarily represent the views of my former firm, Levy-Ratner, of any of my previous clients, or of BSEC as an organization. But I do deeply appreciate, whether you agree with what I have to say or not, BSEC giving me this space among progressive, free thinkers to voice my thoughts. So, moving on. Before we discuss how we extricate ourselves from the current state of affairs, we must look at least briefly at how we got here. As I was coming up as a young radical activist, I was taught, and I still believe, that right-wing movements cannot succeed at winning the support of the working class and the poor unless the left has failed. And let's be clear, the left has failed massively. Granted, there are many things that contributed to the success of the MAGA right. But the right did not succeed solely because of its corporate funding, its media savvy, or its control of Fox News. And it certainly did not succeed because its policies were beneficial to the majority of American voters. Rather, the failure of the Democrats to meaningfully address growing economic inequality over the course of decades opened the door to the flight of working class voters from the party. The Democrats have never been a working class party. Rather, at least since FDR and the Great Depression, And with the historical exception of the segregationist southern wing of the party, which no longer exists, the party has been the more progressive of the two capitalist parties that have dominated American politics for the last 170 years. But as the more progressive of the two capitalist parties, and the party largely supported by the union movement, the episodic success of the Democratic Party has been dependent on its garnering strong majority support from working class voters and voters of color. But by 2016, working class voters had finally had enough. The American middle class was shrinking, with many driven into poverty. Economic inequality had continued to rise, and the dream of upward mobility had become more and more elusive. As inspiring as Obama was in many ways, economic inequity continued to increase during his years in office. In fairness, the acceleration in the growth of economic inequality, the gap between the wealth of those at the top and those who were not, slowed during the Obama years. But still, rather than getting smaller, the disparities increased. So we should not be surprised that so many working class voters, including union voters, gave up on the Democratic Party. The Democrats lost to Trump in 2016 and again in 2024, in my opinion, primarily because they were seen as having failed the working class. In 2016, this made the idea of a disruptor willing to challenge the status quo appealing to many. Many decided they had nothing to lose by trying something new. Of course, they were wrong. Things could and did get worse, and have continued to get worse still. The Democrats lost in 2024 for similar reasons, in my opinion. Large swaths of the class, rightly or wrongly, lacked faith that the Democrats could make things better in any meaningful way. In each of the last three presidential elections, Trump won approximately 2/3 of the voters of white working class voters without college degrees. Even among union voters who are normally more likely to vote and more likely to receive pro-democratic messaging, the margin for the Democrats decreased from nearly 20% in 2008 and 2012 to just 8% in 2016, though it bounced back a little bit over the last two presidential elections. But the fact that the Democratic Party is less popular among working class voters doesn't mean that economic populism and policies that truly benefit working people are no longer popular. Rather, there are strong indications that such policies have been gaining in popularity. Their popularity can be seen in many places, including the success of the Red for Ed strikes in 2018 and 2019. Though in fairness, despite the fact that teachers in public education have been widely maligned by the right, teachers are somewhat uniquely situated. A Pew Research poll conducted last year shows that 83% trust teachers to do their job well. 67% believe teaching is harder than most other jobs, and 74%, including a majority of Republicans, say that teachers are underpaid. And of course, there are schools and teachers in every community. And teachers have historically played an outsized role globally in progressive social movements. But if you look for them, signs that people are embracing progressive economic positions, even while voting for Republicans that oppose such positions, can be found everywhere. For example, there's the fact that voters in 6 states that voted for Trump also voted, often by significant margins, to increase their state's minimum wages, despite opposition from their state Republican parties. And since 2016, 4 red states have voted for paid sick leave via voter initiatives, and 3 have voted for Medicaid expansion. There are also a number of examples of progressive referenda on less explicitly economic issues being approved in red states. including 5 red states which have enshrined abortion rights in their state constitutions, and Florida, which approved a measure allowing most felons who have served their time to vote. Also notable is the fact that in Nebraska in 2024, Dan Osborne, a mechanic and a former union president, running as an independent, while losing to the incumbent Republican, lost by less than 7%, significantly outperforming Kamala Harris, who lost by more than 20%. And there's the fact that fully half of self-described Republicans nationally told Reuters in the fall of 2023 that they supported the national UAW auto strike then underway. And the fact that unions are viewed favorably by 70% of the public, a number not seen in 60 years. All of these facts show that the support for progressive economic positions far outstrips support for the Democratic Party and straddles the divide between Democratic and Republican voters. Yet there can be no doubt, notwithstanding a bit of flux from one election to the next, that the working class has become increasingly divided over time when it comes to party affiliation, and that these divisions seem to have become increasingly entrenched and ossified. Thus, we are at a moment characterized on the one hand by an openness to progressive economic policies at a level unmatched in most of our lifetimes, and on the other hand, by the danger that our democratic system, imperfect as it has been, will implode, and that we will descend into right-wing fascism, and with it, among the long list of horribles, the decimation of the labor movement. In my view, overcoming the political divisions within the working class, which exist notwithstanding the increased unity over actual positions on economic issues, is probably a prerequisite to saving our country from fascism and authoritarianism, and ultimately to the implementation of the progressive policies that a majority of Americans support. Yet, at least as an initial matter, I do not believe that these divisions can be overcome solely by looking to the Democratic Party for leadership, or even looking to it as the vehicle for the coalescence of a progressive populist movement. The failures of the Democratic Party are too deep, both its recent failures and its historical alliance with capitalism. While conducting research for this presentation, I found an interesting study from 2021, conducted by a number of progressive labor organizations, including the Center for Working Class Politics, conducted though by YouGov, a mainstream survey research organization. YouGov surveyed 3,000 voters across Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Thank you all so much for breakfast. In order to determine, the survey was conducted to determine whether a sharper focus on bread and butter economic populism from progressive politicians might allow them to reconnect with disaffected Rust Belt voters. The results show that economic populism resonates strongly across those states. But perhaps the most interesting finding is the fact that hypothetical independent candidates running on the basis of progressive economic positions outperformed hypothetical Democrats delivering the exact same message. In head-to-head tests, the Democratic candidates in all of these states, other than Pennsylvania, don't know why Pennsylvania, underperformed their independent counterparts by 11 to 16 points, even when delivering the exact same economic populist message. This Democratic penalty was largest among working class, Latino, rural, and swing voters. Mind you, may sound otherwise, but I'm not advocating for abandoning the Democratic Party altogether. I know the difference between a capitalist party and what has become a fascist Republican Party. And given the choice and the lack of a viable alternative, I will vote for the capitalist party over the fascist party every time. And I also fully recognize the very real substantive differences between the parties on their positions on many, many issues. While the Democratic Party needs to be transformed and reinvigorated by a new generation of leaders, there is currently no reasonable electoral alternative to even an overly passive, pro-capitalist Democratic Party. Excuse me. That helps explain why the Democrats did so well in elections earlier this month, notwithstanding the party's historically low approval ratings. And most unions will and should continue to provide electoral support to Democratic candidates for all of these reasons, and the fact that the Democratic Party is the party that supports their right to organize. Rather, I'm talking about a mass movement operating broadly within civil society, not running candidates in election, except perhaps in situations where the Democratic Party can be convinced to cede the ground to independents, as was the case with Osborne in the Nebraska Senate race. That said, the thesis I advance today is this: there is broad support for a mass movement committed to populist economic positions, including the right to organize. This support exists among self-identified Democrats, Republicans, and independents. The possibility exists, with left-leaning organizations and progressive unions taking the lead, to build such a movement, but only if organized outside the aegis of the Democratic Party. Why outside the Democratic Party? Both because the party has discredited itself in the eyes of too many working people, but also because identification with the Democratic Party will, given current entrenched divisions in party identification, create an obstacle to the necessary work of uniting working people across those current political divides. Such a movement, if organized independently of the Democratic Party structure, might be able ultimately to bridge the current political divide and to provide the best hope for defeating the worst of Trump's policies. To the extent to which party allegiance has become ossified, the identification of such a movement premised on economic populism with the Democratic Party would be a detriment which would limit its potential reach. This may change over time. Indeed, that is my hope, that the creation of and success of such a mass movement outside the party may be able to save the party in the long run. If the party can transform itself into a genuinely progressive activist force, and there are many elements within and outside of the party working for such a transformation, this mass movement can serve as a bridge that facilitates the ultimate political reunification of the working class and poor under the rubric of the party. If Democrats endorse these efforts and prove themselves to be legitimate fighters, this movement might lead organically to the resurgence of the party. If it cannot, this movement might need to work to make the party its own and take over the apparatus of the party, notwithstanding opposition from the current party leadership. Change for the better or worse is inevitable. We must do what we can to bend it towards more favorable outcomes. As a practical matter, figuring out the details of how we build a broad-based populist movement of the left is beyond the scope of today's presentation, and not something I would be so bold as to suggest we can accomplish at a weekly meeting of BSEC. But as someone who has worked within the labor movement for most of my life, as a union leader, a union dissident, and a legal advisor and advocate, I believe that progressive labor unions are in a position to lead such a movement. I'm the first to acknowledge that the labor movement, while it has arguably advanced social and economic justice in this country more than any other single institution over time, has a history of flaws and contradictions. For example, it has both embodied the racism and sexism of American society and played a central role in combating them. But the labor movement of 2025 is not the same labor movement of the past. The most militant unions, including at their best, unions like the UAW and SEIU, are aggressively organizing new workers in multiple fields and are increasingly willing to take on and fight for progressive political positions that go well beyond the details of their next union contracts. Attempts to organize Amazon and Starbucks have been an inspiration, as have some limited organizing victories in the South. And of course, the national UAW auto strike provided a powerful demonstration of the powerful and power of militant labor action. And Shawn Fain, the UAW president, who won his position as an insurgent candidate and went on to lead the auto strike, but who also leads a union whose 400,000 active members include over 100,000 professional and white-collar workers, including tens of thousands of militant young adjunct professors and graduate student workers, has called for organizing a national general strike. Unions have the strength and the organization to take this on. In fact, they already have a model for doing so in the AFL-CIO's worker centers, which advocate for and provide services to non-union workers. But this outreach must expand exponentially and must focus more than the worker centers have on building a mass movement that advances specific demands. Progressive unions, progressive union members, and their supporters must take the lead and be willing to go outside the bounds of normal union organizing. But while they can still lend support to the Democratic Party in other ways, as an initial matter, the structures and organization used to build this movement should remain strictly and explicitly nonpartisan. In this way, it might just be possible, in my opinion, to take on the daunting task of overcoming the political divide that has divided working people from each other and prevented a more effective resistance to the MAGA right. Thank you.